Okay, so we're going to start in 1 minute with Parashat Vayigash. If people want to find that in their Tanakh or on their Sefaria. I'm just going to mute the people who are unmuted right now, just so when Rabbi Silber starts, we can all hear, but I will unmute people when they ask questions if they need help with that. I believe Rabbi Silber is just about to get back. So as it's 10 o'clock, I will start with my regular little spiel. First of all, of course, welcome everybody. Shavua Tov. Good morning and good evening, depending on your time zone. We're so happy to be learning with you again this week. Welcome to Joseph and Jacob, a journey through Genesis with Rabbi David Silber. As you come into the Zoom room, I will invite you to become a panelist. That just means that if you choose, you can turn your camera on so we can see your lovely smiling faces. And when Rabbi Silber invites questions and comments, you can unmute yourself and ask them yourself. When you're not speaking, we just ask that you keep yourself on mute, because otherwise there's background noise that means that people can't hear. And if you prefer, you can put any questions or comments in the chat. And if you're joining on Facebook Live, then you can put them in the comments and I will bring them to the Zoom. I will be sharing the sources on the screen on Sefaria, but of course you're welcome and encouraged to follow along with your Tanakh at home or on your own Sefaria. And over to Rabbi Silber.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we continue our own journey through Genesis, and we're up to chapter 44 in the 18th pasuk. This is actually Parashat Vayigash, and we come here to the speech of Yehuda. As we remember, Yosef has put his goblet into the silver goblet into the sack of Binyamin, his brother, and the claim is that this silver goblet is a kind of divining instrument, that he's a menachesh. And they find the goblet in Binyamin's sack. Joseph sends one of his men to run out after them and say, "What did you take this goblet, special goblet of my master Joseph? He divines with it, nacheshi nachesh bo." And the brothers say, "We didn't take that. Why we returned the money that we found in our sacks. Whoever took it should die. We'll be slaves." And the fellow says, "No. The one who took it will be a slave, and the rest of you go back in peace. But they all head back, all the brothers head back to the house of Yosef, who's still there. And Yosef again accuses them and says, "Listen, you shouldn't have done this. You should not have repaid good with evil." And Yehuda speaks up then. Yehuda takes the stage at just a few verses prior to our verse 18 and says, "Well, all of us will be slaves. God has found that our sin, we have nothing to say, we have no response, and we'll all be slaves." And Yosef says, "No, just the one that took it will be the slave. The one with whom the goblet has been found shall be the slave. And the rest of you go back. That's where we're up to." So just a couple of comments before we start. First of all, you get a sense over here in the brothers' response in both instances, both the first time and the second time, they have a sense of collective responsibility. It's found in his sack. We discussed last week whether the brothers really believe he took it or not. And that depends on some other factors, not going back into that. But let's say that certainly a valid reading is that everybody knows that Binyamin, strong possibility, did not steal the goblet. In any event, but the goblet was found in the sack. But the brothers say, well, initially, whoever took it should die, but we'll also be slaves. And at the end, Yehuda says, we'll all be slaves. So there's a real sense of collective responsibility. In contrast to the parallel story in Breshit that we read or studied earlier, that's when Yaakov is leaving the house of Lavan, and Rachel steals the Trafim. Rachel, being Benjamin's mother, steals the Trafim of her father, whom Lavan later calls my gods. Lavan himself is a menachesh. The Torah says that Lavan said to Yaakov, "Nichashti, I have divined that ever since you came to my house, it's been good for me. So he says, Nichashti. So we have two parallel stories. Someone, a foreign culture, and takes with him or with her the special object that represents that culture. In the first instance, it's the trafim of Lavan, which Rachel does steal. In the second instance, it's Rachel's son, Binyamin, who is accused of stealing a divining object, which is related to the culture of the land in which they are leaving. And by the way, I would add to this that according to some commentaries, the trafim, I suggested at the time, and I believe it's the most plausible interpretation, that the primary reason that Rachel takes the trafim is that they are some kind of fertility god. Everything Rachel does is to have children. But others have suggested that the trafim are not so much about fertility god and more about kind of GPS. They can tell you where the person has run off to. I don't actually think that's the best interpretation, but the point is that it's interesting if it is it's a kind of divining instrument. So it would really be parallel to what you have over here in terms of the brothers are running away and leaving Mitzrayim and taking with them this divining cup. In any event, the two stories are obviously parallel stories, but in the first instance, Yaakov said, whoever took it should die. When Lavan accuses him of stealing his trust, why did you steal my gods? You're running off to go home. You desire to go to your father's house. Why did you steal my gods? And Yaakov said, no, listen, with whomever you find it, same word, timsa, should not live. But Yaakov did not say, and I also am responsible. Yaakov put the blame on the one that took it, but accepted no personal responsibility, even though Yaakov's the head of the family. So what he probably should have said is, whoever took it is guilty. I'm also guilty, because I'm the patriarch of the family. I'm the head of the family. He did not say that, but the brothers over here do say that. Whoever took it should die. We're also slaves. We're also responsible. And Yehuda goes farther. We're all slaves. We're all equally responsible. We are in the one with whom the cup has been found. So that's actually very interesting. By the way, just as a side point, the verse I just cited earlier, back in chapter 31, which is when Lavan says to Yaakov, first of all, why did you steal away in the night? Why did you run off without telling me? That's the first accusation. And then Lavan added in chapter 31, V'yatad nichsof nichsafta. Okay, I understand. You desire to go to your father's house. Lama ganafta et Elohai. Why did you steal my gods? You're going off to your father, to your land, to your God. What do you want with my God? But what's interesting in the verse in chapter 31, when Lavan says you desire to go home, the Hebrew is nichsof nichsafta. Nichsof nichsafta is to desire, but one can't help seeing that nichsof nichsafta is the same word as kesef. Maybe that's the meaning of kesef, something that you desire. It's a desirable good is kesef, which means silver, but it also means money. And there you have a play on the kesef and the why did you steal my gods, which is a sort of a play on you're kind of a double thief. You not only stole my gods, but you stole a valuable thing of mine. And what's interesting is over here in the Yosef Binyamin business, it's all about kesef. He returns the kesef to all the brothers, and then the Gavia HaKesef, the silver goblet. So the two stories are even linked in terms of the kesef, the accusation that Lavan makes of Yaakov as you're a thief, not just stealing my gods, not just running away, but you're a thief in general, accusing him in effect of stealing taking his wealth from Lavan, which Yaakov does do, but I wouldn't call it theft. I would call it legal manipulation. He abides by the contract. He tricks Lavan, but he abides by the contract. But there you have the plan of the kesef. Here you have kesef. In short, the two stories are parallel, and what the parallels underscore is the fact that the brothers are taking collective responsibility. But now Yehuda assumes the stage. Even when they went home, earlier in chapter 44, it says in verse number 14, Vayavo Yehuda v'yachav beito Yosef. So it singles out Judah already in verse number 14. Judah and the brothers went back. So you know that Judah is going to assume the primary role over here. The Torah already has put Judah within the Joseph narrative. Back in chapter 38, Judah and Tamar, there's a whole chapter devoted to Judah. We spoke about that at length. And here we have, in a sense, the culmination or the deep connection between what happened in Judah and Tamar back in chapter 38, and now in this next speech of Judah. So we have over here, beginning with chapter 44, verse number 18, and we're about to begin, we're going to have two long speeches. I'm not sure we'll get to both of them today. We have two long speeches. We have a very long speech of Judah, beginning with Vayigash Elav Yehudah, which will be followed by Joseph revealing Joseph's identity to his brothers. And then Joseph has a long speech. And one of the interesting things we'll be looking at, maybe not this week, maybe next week, is how one reads one speech in light of the other. Comparison and contrast between the two speeches. But here we come to the first long, great speech of Yehudah. The Joseph narrative in general, we've noticed this several times already, feels completely different from the rest of Sefer Bereshit. It reads like a novel, actually. And one of the features that it has is long speeches. And we'll talk about that a little in the future as well. But now let's begin with verse number 18. So this is really one of the great turning points in the Joseph narrative. It says, Vayigash Elav Yehudah. So Judah Vayigash. Vayigash is to draw near. Judah draws near to him being Joseph. Vayomer bi Adoni. And he said, bi is taken usually as, they translate, please my Lord. He calls Joseph Adoni. Yedaberna avdecha davar b'yeznei Adoni. Let your servant say something in the ears of my Lord. Please don't be angry. Ki kamocha ki Pharaoh, you who are the equal of Pharaoh. He says, listen, I know maybe it's inappropriate to approach you, you being the supreme leader or equal to the supreme leader of Egypt. I come as your servant, but please let me say something. Let me speak over here. So Yehudah steps forward. And the reason he steps forward, we know, and he says it later on, towards the end of his speech, he steps forward because back in chapter, 41, he is the 42. He's the one who, 42, he's the one who says to his father, send Binyamin with me. Anochi ervenu, I will take responsibility. I'll be the Arev. And if I don't bring him back to you, I will be accounted a sinner all of my days. So Yehudah is in a very special position. He's not just one of the brothers, but he's the one brother, first of all, who convinced Yaakov to send Binyamin. Without Judah's commitment, Binyamin would not be in this situation. And second of all, he also put himself on the line. If I don't bring him back, I will be accounted a sinner. So he has two reasons. One is this the whole thing is, he says, it's really my fault. I'm the one who my father didn't want to let him go, as we'll see, and I'm the one who's responsible for the situation. And there's the other part of it that he doesn't emphasize, but he's also could suffer a terrible, I will be accounted a sinner all of my days. Before we get to the content of Judah's speech, I simply want to point out that it begins with the word Vayigash, to draw near. And Vayigash, to come close, to draw near, often means more than just physically standing up and walking towards. But Vayigash can mean more of trying to draw near in a deeper sense. So over here, it begins with Vayigash. That's what Yehudah says to Yosef. And when Yosef reveals himself to the brothers, first he says, I am Joseph, and the brothers are shocked. And then Joseph says to them later on in the chapter, to chapter 40, chapter 45, after Joseph reveals himself, he says, I am Joseph, and the brothers are shocked. And then Joseph says in verse number 4 of chapter 45, Vayomer Yosef Elechav, Kishuna Elai Vayigashu. Verse number 5, Kishuna Elai Vayigashu. You passed it, I think, already. No? Verse number 4. Verse number 4. Vayomer Yosef Elechav, Kishuna Elai Vayigashu. Come close to me. Kishu Vayigashu. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. So Geshuna Elai Vayigashu, come close to me. It's not just physically come close. It means let's see if we can get closer to each other. It's not an accident, it's not a coincidence that the land in which finally the brothers, when they come to Egypt, the land which they live in, and Joseph arranges it as such, is called Eretz Goshen, the land of closeness. And that's the whole point, that Joseph wants his brothers and his father especially to come down to Egypt, not to simply live in Egypt. He doesn't want that. He wants them, Vayisem Karov Elai, you should be close to me. And the name of the land is the land of Goshen. So we have Vayigash of Yehuda, we have the Geshuna Vayigashu of Joseph, and ultimately we have the land of Goshen. What we have over here is a coming close, a drawing near. The family has to be rebuilt. That's what this is all about. That's what the speech is all about. And it's not so simple, as we'll see, because there are many things that have to be worked out in order for the family to be put back together. Remember, Jacob's dream was to build a house, the inclusive structure. But there are so many divisions within the family right now, and all of them, if it's going to work out that we can be one family, they have to be discussed, they have to be worked out, have to be able to come together on all these different issues. So let's now get back to Judah's speech. So first of all, Judah has an apology. It's interesting that Rashi, I think it's not the pshat at all. For Rashi reads into Judah's speech two things. Number one, I want to come close to you. But B, if you don't want him close to me, then maybe we're going to attack you and we're going to take him by force. But of course, when you read the pasuk, that seems very far from the pshat. I mean, it's wishful thinking on Rashi's part, maybe, that the Jew would have this kind of power to be able to dictate terms to the viceroy of Egypt. In the pshat of it, it's clearly that's not the case. And the word that's emphasized over and over again here is two words. First of all, the word Adoni. Joseph is the master. That appears 10 times. And then we have Eved, the servant, which appears a total of, I think Adoni is 7 times. And Eved will appear 13 times in the chapter. We'll discuss how it appears and when it appears. Anyway, now we'll start with Judah's speech. So Judah first draws near, has this sort of apology. Now he's going to speak. And he says, the next pasuk in 19, Adoni sha'al et avodav re'mar, hayesh lechem avawach. He's now going to repeat the story. But what's interesting about Judah's speech is, first of all, what he says, and B, what he doesn't say. Those are two very interesting features. But what he does say is, you asked, the Adoni, master, asked the servants, do you have a father or brother? Now, the truth of the matter is, if you remember the story, that's not exactly what he asked them. He didn't, not in the text that we have. In the text that we have, he accuses them of being spies. And the brothers said, we're not spies, we're a bunch of brothers. In fact, there are 12 of us. 10 are here. One is back with our father, and the other one is missing, is a nenu. That's what Joseph didn't ask them, do you have a father or brother? What Yehuda intuits over here, correctly, is that actually, that is what Joseph is asking. That for whatever reason, Yehuda doesn't know why, but for whatever reason, he seems to have some interest in this family, and in particular, he has on more than one occasion asked about the old father, is he still alive? And initially, Yehuda has the sense that he's asking about the family. So he says to Yosef, you asked us. I'm recalling what happened. I remember you asking us if we have a father or a brother. By the way, this point of that Joseph asked, do you have a father or a brother, which in the initial story is not mentioned at all. But when the brothers speak to their father, when they come back from Egypt the first time, and they find the silver in their bags, the money in their bags, and they're all frightened, and Jacob says, he's not going to let Benjamin go. He's afraid, who knows what he suspects. And then Jacob, with the conversation there, and Yaakov asks his children, why did you tell him you have a brother? And they all say to Yaakov, the man asked us. The man asked us. Let me read exactly what it is. In chapter 43, they said, chapter 43, verse 7, says, why did you tell them you have another brother? Why did you harm me, says Jacob? They said, because he asked us, is our father still alive? Is there a brother? Now, in our text, we don't have that. But it doesn't mean that he didn't say it. He may well have said it. The Torah doesn't necessarily present it as recording everything Joseph said. But it's clear from what the brother said back in chapter 43, and it's clear from what Yehuda says over here, either Joseph said it explicitly or Yehuda is hearing what Joseph is really saying. He's intuiting. You asked us, let's get back to our chapter now. You asked us, you Joseph, you bastard, because about Adonai, you asked us, do you have a father or do you have a brother? And now we continue with verse number 20. And we said to our Lord, Yeshulanu Abzokain, Yelad Zikunim Katan, V'yachiv Meit, V'yivater Hulavado Li'imo, V'yaviv Ahivo. This is a very interesting pasuk. We said to our Lord, we have an old father, an Abzokain, and a Yelad Zikunim Katan, and a child, Zikunim, a child born in the old age of a little child born in the old age of his father, a Yelad Zikunim. That's the first half of the verse. V'yachiv meit, and his brother has died. V'yivater hu levado li'imo, v'yaviv ahevo. He alone remains, all that's left of his mother, and his father loves him. V'yaviv ahevo. This is a very important pasuk for Yehuda's speech. So let's just go through this pasuk very carefully, and then I will stop and take comments or questions. So Yehuda says, we answered you. We have an old father, an Abzokain, and a Yelad Zikunim. Now there are 2 points here that are very interesting. First of all, he's drawing a line. Yehuda puts it in terms of that you asked about the father and the brother, and what Yehuda is saying over here, that the father and brother are very similar in the following sense. The Av is Zakain, and the Yelad is a Yelad Zikunim. So right away, there's some kind of link made between this particular child and the Av Zakain, the Yelad Zikunim and the Av Zakain. That's point number one. Point number two, equally important for our purposes, is that in the story back in chapter 37, this is the story of Jacob, Ewa Toldot Yaakov Yosef, and it starts with Joseph. It says that Yaakov loved Joseph more than all the other brothers. He ben Zikunim hulo. He was a child born in his old age, a ben Zikunim. Now, in point of fact, Joseph is not the youngest child, but he is the next youngest child. Binyamin is the youngest. But in that story over there, Binyamin doesn't appear at all, actually. So there's something to be said for the fact that the ben Zikunim and now the Yelad Zikunim are tied together. So Binyamin is tied to his father in the language of the verse, and the Av Zakain is tied to the Yelad Zikunim. But we remember that the Ben Zikunim was Yosef, so that Binyamin is being set up over here, and in fact is, one might say, the replacement for Joseph. He's the proxy of Joseph in the story. That's very important, because that means that the way that the brothers relate to Binyamin in the story over here, at present, is the way at present they might relate to Yosef, not the way they once related to Yosef, which is out of jealousy and hatred. Maybe that things have changed. We know that they feel sorry about Joseph. They said so. We are guilty for our brother who cried out that we didn't help him. That's the first half of the verse. The second half of the verse is even more interesting. But there's several interesting points in the second half of this verse. First of all, V'yachiv meit. His brother has died. Now, in truth, when you look at the Chumash, which describes the story of Yosef, and the brothers talk about Yosef, or the Torah talks about Yosef, Yaakov talks about Yosef, the term the Torah uses is not made. It's not made. It's einenu. The Torah uses the word einenu for Joseph. Yosef einenu v'Shimon einenu. Einenu. That's the term that's used. Reuven comes back from the pit. Hayelad einenu. V'ani ana aniva. And the brothers themselves earlier, when Joseph asked about the family, we have a father, our brothers with our father. We're 12 of us. One is back with the father. And one is missing or not. Here he says mate, and only here. And the question is why? So the point is, the reason he says mate over here as opposed to a nenu, because a nenu suggests the possibility that you might find him. He's missing, but maybe he'll be found. But if he's dead, he's gone. And the point over here is to emphasize the second half of this little line. He's all that is left. And from his mother, Rachel, he's the only one left, because the other brother is dead. V'achiv mate. There's also another reason he says achiv mate over here that I'll come to a little bit later. But let me just make the following observation about this pasuk and why it's such an interesting pasuk. What makes it a very interesting pasuk, I mean, each piece of it is interesting. The zaken and zakunim, the mate as opposed to enenu. But the last half of the pasuk, vayivater hu levado le'imo v'aviv ahivo. The words vayivater hu levado. Anybody who reads the verse, of course, remembers that those words were spoken of Yaakov at a very particular time. When Yaakov returns from the house of Lavan, he returns. It's a story after running away from Lavan with the Trafim, actually. It's actually the next narrative, preparation for meeting Esau. As part of that narrative, Yaakov fears Esau. Esau is coming towards him with 400 men. Yaakov prepares for Esau. He separates his family into two parts. He prays to God. He sends gifts, and then he brings the whole family over the wadi. Ma'avar Yabok, the Yabok crossing. He brings them all across the crossing with the possessions, and then the Torah says, "Vayivater Yaakov levado," and Yaakov was left alone. So here we have to ask ourselves the question. Here we're describing Binyamin. And now the question is, why is the Torah describing Binyamin as Vayivater hu levado? So on one level, the answer is simple. It's another link that the Torah is drawing between Binyamin on one hand, the Yelod Zikunim, and the Av Zaken on the other. On one level, that's certainly true, because that's going to be the main point of Yehuda. You can't separate the old man from the young child. They're inseparable. And I'll explain more later. However, I think it's fair to say that's not sufficient. That is true, but not sufficient, and there's got to be something else to Vayivater hu levado. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. It's a very important point. But let me just stop here for a moment and take any comments or questions, if anybody has a comment or questions till now.
I think that there's another word that comes up again and again, and that's aviv. That comes up like 14 times in this perek. I think I get the feeling that he knows who Yosef is, and he's pressing his button in particular by keeping in almost every pasuk. He mentions it at least once or twice. In other words, he's being, I agree, the Evan and the Adoni, but even more than that is the Av. He's really pounding away at that. Your father, the father, to break him.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I don't believe that the brothers know it's Yosef. I don't think you can say that, because later on it makes it very clear. Ani Yosef, they are dumbfounded when he says it. So there's no way he knows it's Yosef. It's not possible. But he does know one thing, that for whatever some strange reason, that Yosef has a deep interest in this old man. That he knows. And whatever the reason may be, that's going to be his main line of attack over here. I'll explain it later on. But of course, the word Avi is here. It's the last word of his speech also. It appears over and over again. It's also the last word of Joseph's speech. So they each in their own way have a very powerful connection to their father. Yehuda's connection is very simply, apart from caring for his father, he also committed to his father. He said to him, he says, if I don't bring him back, I will be accounted a sinner to you all my days. So that he certainly doesn't want. Really sort of excommunicated from his father, or whatever that entails. But no, I don't think he actually knows it's Yosef. I don't think we can say that, given the fact the Pasuk says quite the opposite. But you wouldn't be the first to suggest it. I don't think it's right. But okay, let's anybody else?
We have a comment in the chat from Neva. She says Yaakov has referred to the second in command to Pharaoh as the Ish, and he fought the Ish Livado.
Yes, I will get to that later on. That's a very important point. I will get to that later on. That is where I'm going. Yes, correct. That still has to be, I have a particular take on it, but I will get to that. That is very true, that Joseph is referred to as the Ish. And by the way, not just here, but several times before, when Yehuda speaks to Yaakov and says, Yaakov says, get us more food. And Yehuda says, we can't. Says the Ish said to us, Lo tiru panai, you can't see my face without your brother. So yes, so that is very significant, and that's where I'm headed with this thing. I'll come back to that in a minute. So we'll return to that. That's a good point. Okay, I hope to explain that, offer a possibility. Fine. Now let's continue. Next verse. So, Yehuda is saying, we told you that we can't do this because he can't leave his father. Father loves him, and that's all he has left. He has nobody else. And you said to your servants, you, Joseph, said to us, bring him down. I want to look at him. I want to place my eye upon him, set my eyes on him. That's what you said to us. And we said to my Lord, again, we don't have this in the initial story. We said that the Nar can't leave his father. If he leaves his father, Vameit. Now, the question is, who is Vameit? You can read it two ways. We said he can't leave his father, for if he leaves his father, Vameit, he will die. Or you can read it, he can't leave his father, because if he leaves his father, Vameit, his father will die. It's unclear, actually. I would say it's a case of purposeful ambiguity, because the point of Yehuda's speech is that the father and this particular child are actually inseparable. So you can't see who Vameit is. Vameit could be the father. Vameit could be the child. But either way, the two are inseparable. Now, and then the next verse is, but you said, if you don't bring him down, you will not be allowed to see my face again. Lo tosifu, and maybe there's a play on Yosef, lo tosifu and lo panai. Now, the point over here is that what's interesting about this theme of seeing and seeing the face. It's what Judah said earlier. The man said, you can't see my face except if you bring the child down. And we remember that in the story that I just referenced, namely, Vayivoter Yaakov Livado, right? When Jacob was left alone to wrestle with the mysterious Ish. But the context of that story is that Yaakov wants to make sure that Esau doesn't destroy him and his entire family. He has to figure out a way to make peace with his brother Esau. And prior to meeting Esau, who's approaching him, and the rest of the families on the other side of the Yabok, we have this mysterious struggle with this Ish, with this person, human/divine being, emissary of God, human being, and Jacob wrestles with the Ish, and the Ish cannot destroy Jacob. And the Ish is forced to bless Jacob. And Jacob names the place of the wrestling Peniel, the face of God. For Jacob said, Ki ra'iti Elohim panima panim, I have seen God face to face. Batina tzel mafshi, and I have been saved. That's the end of chapter 32. So it talks about seeing the face, seeing God's face. I have survived the struggle with the Ish. I have seen God face to face and have survived. In the next chapter, when he finally meets Esav in chapter 33, and he offers Esav the gifts, and Esav says, "What's all this? What are all these presents? What's this stuff I'm seeing? All these animals?" He says, "This is my gift to you," says Yaakov to Esav. "Ki al kein ra'iti panecha," for seeing your face. Kirot Pnei Elohim is like seeing the face of God. V'tirtzeni, and you will accept me. I would say tirtzeni, to accept me. Often the word ratzon is used in terms of sacrifices. So there you have. It's very striking that what Yaakov is seeking in the story is rapprochement with Esav. He wants to be able to coexist with Esav, and it's put in the terms of to see the face, the idea of seeing the face or seeing God's face. We have this already later in the Torah, 3 times a year to go up to the temple to see, right? Yeroeh kol zechurecha et pnei Hashem, right? The idea of seeing the face of God. So seeing the face of God presumably means God accepting you. Rapprochement with God, some kind of relationship with God, right? The name of the place which Jacob, the Akedah, Abraham names the place Hashem Yireh. Hashem Ye'omer Hayom Bahar Hashem Yireh. So the idea of seeing the face has a sense of forgiveness, but it's actually central to the story of Esav and Yaakov. So we have over here, one might see already 2 references to the Esav Yaakov rapprochement, which is first of all Vayivater Yaakov Levado, and now we come across Lo Tosifun Gerod Ponai, and of course we all remember that when Jacob sent the brothers down with Benjamin to Egypt, he said to them, "Take this gift," which he calls a mincha, right? They prepare the mincha for Yosef, the mincha, emphasis on the mincha. That's what Yaakov sends to Esav to make the rapprochement with Esav. He sends a mincha li Esav achiv. So we have all kinds of connections now to the story of Yaakov and Esav, which narratively follows right after the story of Yaakov running away from Lavan and Rachel taking the Trafim. So the stories line up perfectly, actually. The story of the Gavia and now the speech of Vayigash lines up perfectly with Yaakov leaving the house of Lavan, followed by Yaakov's encounter with Esav. Now the difference between, we've already had intimations that the Yosef brother relationship is similar to the Yaakov-Esav relationship. And I'll mention one in particular that's very interesting, that in the very beginning of the, apart from the fact that the brothers actually tried to kill Yosef, which is another parallel between Yaakov and Esav. Esav says, "I will kill my brother." He never does, but he's thinking about it, and the brothers actually try to. But what's interesting is the first speech, the first story of Yosef, we have Yosef's dreams. We are sheaving sheaves in the field, and your sheaf gets up and bows down to mine. Now remember, in the case of Yaakov and Esav, when Rebecca is expecting twins, she doesn't understand what's going on, and she goes to seek out God with Droshet Hashem, and Hashem says, "Shnei goyim b'v'nech," you have 2 nations inside you. One nation shall be more powerful than the other. And the Chumash plays off la'om mila'om yamatz to ma'almim alumim, kama alumati v'gam nitzava, to subena alumotechem v'tishtachavena la'alumati. So the 5 times of the alumot in the Joseph narrative plays off the prophecy of Rebecca with Yaakov and Esav, which is la'om mila'om yamatz. Interesting play. In short, we are encouraged to think about the story of Yosef and his brothers in the context of Yaakov and Esav, but they're not the same. And the reason they're not the same is very simply this. When it comes to Yaakov and Esav, the Torah makes it very clear, as clear as anything can be, that Yaakov and Esav walking 2 different paths. We want them to be able to get along with each other. That's the hope, but they can't ever be one nation. They're completely separate and different It's a choice. It's one or the other. In the case of Yosef and the brothers, though, it's not a choice of one or the other. Yaakov's dream was to build the bayit, the inclusive structure, which at the end of the book he will build. He's going to bless all his 12 sons. No one gets excluded from the blessing. Some blessings are better than others, but everybody is included. So Yosef is not one that you can simply, okay, you live your life, I'll live my life. That's not going to work over here. The challenge is much greater. The challenge is, can we integrate Yosef into the family? Can Yosef become part of the family? That's the great challenge that has existed already and will exist till the end of this book. And it's not so simple. I will come back to the Vayivater Rivado shortly. So this is it. So Yehuda is recalls this. Let's take another couple of verses. Next pasuk is Vayihikyo lino l'abdecha avi, v'naged lo et divrei Adoni. When we went up to our father, we said all that my Lord has told us. Vayomer Avinu, and our father said, Shuvu shivru lanu miyochel. Go back and get some more food for us. And yet Yehuda says to Yosef, we said to our father, we can't go. It's the next verse. Scroll down. Lo nuchal laredet, im yesh achinu hakotoni tanu v'yaradnu, ki lo nuchal. He had the same verse. Lo nuchal lirot panei haish. We can't see the guy's face. V'yachinu hakoton einenu itanu. If the young child is a nenu itanu. Here's very interesting, by the way. Here we have the word enenu, which is references Binyamin. It's another link between Yosef and Binyamin. Remember, Binyamin will function in the story as Yosef's proxy. He's the child, the Ben Zekunim, born to the mother that Yaakov loves, Rachel. So we have, and that's very important for the story because evidence of how the brothers would now treat Yosef is how they now treat Binyamin. And remember something else about Binyamin, that Yosef has gone out of his way, in effect, to favor Binyamin. When they're eating with Joseph in the house, he gives Binyamin 5 portions, 5 times as many portions as the other brothers. So he has been favored. So it's again puts Binyamin in the same kind of situation that for whatever reason, it's not Binyamin's fault, but he is favored by the viceroy of Egypt. He's favored by his father. His father doesn't want to let him go, lest bad things happen to him. But he doesn't say that about the other brothers. Pen yikrenu ason, right? But the other brothers, you go. But Binyamin have to protect. So Yosef has, again, set up a situation in which there's favoritism being shown towards Binyamin. And in effect, whatever Yosef's motive is, this is the test. Are the brothers going to go out of the way to try to protect this youngest brother who, first of all, might in theory be guilty of the crime? It's the crime that his mother did, stealing the magical object of the foreign culture. And not only that, the favored one, not just of the father, but even the viceroy of Egypt favors his kid. So that's the challenge over here. That's the challenge. So Yehuda says, we can't go down. We can't see the guy's face if our little brother is not with us. Okay, before we get to the conclusion of Yehuda's speech, I want to make one other point over here, and then I'll take comments and questions. And that is, what's interesting in the speech, apart from everything that we've seen so far, is what Yehuda does not say. Yehuda never makes the case, never says to Joseph, you know something? I don't think he actually stole the goblet. Earlier they said, yes, how could we have stolen the goblet? We even returned money. Now the argument we returned money and therefore could not have stolen the goblet would not apply to Benjamin, because Benjamin wasn't there the first time. But it's strong, we have evidence, certainly, if you believe that the brothers know that Benjamin did not steal the goblet, because if they find their money in their own sacks, I raise it as a possibility. He returns all their kesef. They know they didn't take the kesef. If they actually know that there's kesef in the sacks, which is not clear, but if they know that, then presumably they know something's very fishy going on over here, because the money keeps getting returned to them, and they didn't take it. The Ramban thinks that Joseph told them that he's giving back the money, but that's not in the text. He says that for this reason. If they find it once again, they have to know that Benjamin's innocent. That's what the Ramban is thinking. It's not clear they know, but Yehuda never raises that as a possibility. he intimates that he knows he didn't take it. He says, we're all guilty, including the one in whose sack money was found, which sounds like it was found in his sack, but frankly, I don't think he took it. But he doesn't make that argument. And the point I wanted to emphasize is he doesn't make the argument because even though he may well believe that Benjamin is innocent, that's not the argument that's going to advance the cause. He has one goal over here, to let Benjamin go. So there's no point to argue that he's innocent because if he was framed, that's not going to do any good anyway. If for whatever reason he's being framed, what good would it do? So the only argument he can make is a different argument, which is, we'll get to the actual argument he's making over here, but he never says, ever, that he leaves certain things out. He's very focused. He leaves out the fact that he probably didn't take it. He doesn't mention, for example, that the reason they come down to Egypt, part of the reason is not just the food, but, and this is a good question, their brother's being held hostage down there. Shimon was held hostage. So certainly some of the thinking's got to be, strangely enough, Yaakov doesn't seem too concerned about that, but certainly possible that the brothers have an interest in freeing their fellow brother Shimon. Shimon's not Yaakov's favorite, no doubt, because of the Shechem business, and he's probably the ringleader in the sale of Joseph or attempted murder of Joseph. But he never mentions that. Because what's the point? He has a particular goal over here, a particular kind of argument, which he thinks might work based on his understanding of this viceroy. Okay, are there any comments or questions at this point? And
feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question or put them in the chat and I'll read them out. I think Aviva has a question.
It's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
And it's formulating, I'm not sure, but when you mentioned the parallels by Vater Levado and Lirot Pnei Ha'ish, that both of these stories are a transformation. Jacob was transformed from Jacob to Israel, and the reconciliation of the brothers, this struggle, and the mystery of who is the Ish. Was the Ish a Malach, and is the Ish, I mean, they don't know who Joseph is, so it's not solid in my mind, but I think there's a struggle and an atonement and a transformation that's happening here.
I agree. Let me just comment about, at this point, I'll comment about what I was thinking about Vayivater Yaakov Levado and with Binyamin Vayivater Hu Levado. And that is that, as someone noted earlier, Joseph is called the Ish, actually. Vayomer Abdecha Ish Eleinu, right? Where was that word? Joseph is Kilonuchal Rod Pnei Ish, right?
Yes.
Kilonuchal Rod Pnei Ish. Here Joseph is called the Ish, and earlier he's also called the Ish several times.
Right.
And they go down the first time.
What I mean is parallel with the mysterious.
Right, that's right. I understand. So what I was thinking was this, that actually in the case of Jacob, when Jacob can't cross over the Yabok. Everybody crosses over, but Jacob can't cross over because if he remains just Jacob, he's not worthy of crossing over. If he crosses over, he's getting to the covenantal blessing. And Yaakov has a history with his brother Esau, who's tricking Esau and his blind father. The only way Jacob can cross over is if he somehow transforms. The Ish over there is trying to block him. The Ish is there to stop him. And the way Yaakov overcomes the Ish is by becoming somebody else. As the Ish says, what's your name? Jacob. It's not Jacob anymore, it's Israel. You have wrestled with God and with human and you have prevailed. In the case of Yaakov, he's able to cross over. Now, it's not simple because he's wounded in the struggle. And that's the business there of the Gid HaNoshed, the dislocated sinew. And it says, therefore, the children of Israel don't eat the dislocated sinew, because that's where this Ish had hurt Jacob. But the point is, Jacob does cross over, and he does reconcile with his brothers, and he's able to relocate into the land. That's one story. Then there's another story. Back in chapter 37, when Joseph is searching for his brothers, and he's trying to find his brothers in Shechem, Ish, and an Ish finds Joseph, who was lost in the field. And the Ish says, what are you looking for? My brothers. I find Oh, they've already left here, he says. Nasumi said, they've left, they've gone to Dotan. And Joseph walks towards Dotan. They see him from a distance. They conspire to kill him. They send him down to Egypt, out of the land. And as a remark, in a sense, he's already out of the land before that. He missed the stop at Shechem, the last stop in the land. Goes down to Egypt, becomes an Egyptian for all practical purposes. And he names his first son Menashe, which means forgetfulness. So the striking parallel between Menashe, which represents relocating out of the land, and the Gid Hanoshe, which represents the ability to go into the land. So those are two cases. In this first instance, the Ish is overcome. In the second instance, the Ish overcomes Joseph or sends Joseph out. Now we have another case. Now we have a case of where Benjamin is Vayivater Levado. But the fact of the matter is, and I've pointed out, that Benjamin, yes, Benjamin is the one who left for Jacob as far as Rachel is concerned. But in the story, in the biggest picture, the whole point is that Benjamin is Joseph's proxy. He's the Ben Zekunim, as Joseph was. He's the son of Rachel, as Joseph was. He's the favored one, as Joseph was. And he's the litmus test how the brothers would actually behave towards Joseph. But the point over here is, I would say that Vayivater Levado is not just Benjamin, but the one who's actually alone, separate from all the rest of the entire family, is actually Joseph. Joseph is Vayivater Levado. So the point is, the point is that Benjamin, that the danger over here is that Benjamin will be left alone, not reuniting with the family. But the only way to get Benjamin to reunite with the family is to overcome the Ish, which is Joseph. But in overcoming the Ish, which is Joseph, you also Joseph overcoming Joseph, because the Benjamin represents Joseph. So the power of the story over here, it's exactly the question. It's about Benjamin, of course, but it's really about Joseph. Will Joseph be able to reconnect to his brothers or not? In order to do that, and one might say he has to overcome himself because he's the Ish, right? So he's the Ish. He is Benjamin. And how can you defeat the Ish? The only way to defeat the Ish is not through power. Judah has no power. He's a slave, in effect. He calls himself a slave. He has no power. The only way is to convince Joseph that Joseph has to take the step to reconnect with his brothers. That's the point over here. So it actually plays off the Esav Yaakov story, but here the Ish is not as representing Esav, one might say. The Ish is actually representing Joseph. The Ish is Joseph. He's called the Ish. And let's see whether Yehuda's speech will be able to not just save Benjamin, but in effect to save Joseph. In reuniting Benjamin and saying, okay, Benjamin can reconnect to his father, what Joseph is really saying is, I can reconnect to my father. And this is the internal struggle within Joseph. Who is Joseph? Is he the Egyptian? From every outward appearance, he is the Egyptian. On the other hand, he cries when he meets his brothers. He's cried several times. And this is the question. And on a moral plane, he's not an Egyptian. That's the story of Mrs. Potiphar. On a moral plane, he can't. That's what Egyptians do. Egyptians see and take. That's the first story of Mitzrayim. When Joseph says to Mrs. Potiphar, I can't do it, he's saying, in effect, I'm not this way. This is not how I was trained. That's not my values. I'm not put up this way. So, it says the Medrash, he saw his father's image. It's so true. So this is the question. We come to a great climax over here. How will Joseph respond to the great speech? So that's the Vayivater Levado. Yeah.
Follow-up question. Do the brothers also undergo a transformation, or is it only Joseph who does?
Well, the brothers have been undergoing a transformation ever since they got down to Egypt. For example, when in the first story, one said to his brothers, we are guilty for our brother. We heard his cries and did not respond. Number two, they also say, the brothers also say, when the money is found in the sack of one of them, what has God done to us? Plural. The brothers also say with Benjamin, we shall all be your slaves. So yes, everybody's got to be transformed over here. The brothers towards Joseph, Joseph toward the brothers, Yaakov towards Joseph. We'll get to all the relationships have to be repaired. And it's not so simple to do it, as we'll see, because there are different levels of repair. I would argue that at the end of this book, the brothers and Joseph, there's still some doubt about Joseph. We'll see there. But there is enough trust to build a relationship to include Joseph in the family. I think that's Yaakov's mission, is to include Joseph in the family. How he does it, we'll see. Okay, is anybody else who wants to comment now? Otherwise, we'll just continue with the speech. we remove Judah's speech. Okay, so let's continue with the speech of Yehuda. This is up to verse number 27. Vayomer Avdecha Avi Elenu. Quotes Jacob Avdecha, your servant, our father, said to us, Atem Yudatem Kishnayim Yodali Ishti. You know, he said, you know that my wife had 2 children. That's a remarkable verse, actually, because it sounds like Yehuda is reporting what our father said. He's not criticizing it. He's saying something which is very true. Let me tell you, he says, my wife had 2 children. Now Jacob has 12 sons and plus Dinah, and we know of maybe more daughters too. But he's saying something which is true. He says, I have 4 wives, I have at least 12 boys. But let me tell you something. I had 1 wife. Ishti is Rachel. And it's so true, by the way, when it gives the genealogies, B'nai Rachel, Eshet Yaakov, Yosef Binyamin. A lot of wives, a lot of relationships, 1 wife. That was the one he loved. That's the one he wanted to marry. He was tricked. He ends up with another wife, with a sister, whom he didn't want to marry. He was called initially the hated one. Okay, he makes his peace with Leah. But what's interesting, by the way, that the Chumash is so precise. When Jacob is dying, about to die, he talks to all his children about burying him in the family plot in Marat HaMachpelah. It's found at the very end of chapter 49. And he says to them, now read this verse at the end, a very striking verse at the end of chapter 49. If I can find this here. After all the blessings, he says the following. He calls all of his sons over to him. He says, bury me in the grave of my ancestors. This is verse number 29 of chapter 49. In the grave that they purchased from Ephron, right? Verse number 30. Verse 31. Shama kavru et Abraham v'et Sarah ishto. In that grave, says Jacob, they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. Shama kavru et Yitzchak v'et Rivka ishto. There they buried Yitzchak and Rebekah, his wife. The Shama kavarti et Leah. And there I buried Leah. What word is missing in verse number 31? The word that's missing is V'shama kavarti et Leah ishti. And there I buried Leah, my wife. He doesn't say that. I buried Leah. Abraham and his wife are buried there. Isaac and his wife are buried there. And there's Leah. Leah is your wife, but no. She is my wife, of course, but my wife is Rachel. My wife's not buried there. Rachel's my wife. And my point over here is that when Yehuda reports, he's reporting to Joseph, because Joseph is thinking, this viceroy is thinking, here I see in front of me 11 children. I see 11 children in front of me. Actually, there are 12. Joseph's there too, but I see 11 children in front of me. What is the fuss about this kid? He's got 10 other kids. And Judah says, you don't understand something. His wife, he had 1 wife. One of them is dead. One of the kids is dead. This is the only kid left to that wife, his beloved wife, Ishti. And my point is that Yehuda, in some sense, is coming to terms with this. He's accepting it on some level. And that's actually a very important point. You always want to change the other guy. And sometimes you come to a recognition that the other guy's not going to change. The person's not going to change. The person is an old person, that they're set in their ways. And life has done many things. And you have to accept people sometimes for who they are. You can't change everything. And Yehuda says, let me tell you something. Our father had 1 wife. And that wife had 2 kids. And this is the only one left to his wife. Of course, we're his children. We care about him. He is our father. Obviously, he cares about him. That's the whole point. He cares deeply about him. But you have to understand him. And we understand it perfectly well. There was only 1 woman he ever wanted to marry. He got stuck with 3 more. But that wasn't his choice. His choice was 1. So that is part of the reconciliation here. That has to happen. The brothers have to accept this. And it's very important that they accept it. And here you have a sense that Yehuda actually accepts it. And now he continues speaking. Now he talks with Yaakov. One who left me, and one of them left me, and I said, Shui Tarov Torah, he's been torn to pieces. I have not seen him hence till now. Earlier he said he was dead to emphasize this is the only one left. And in this verse, I think what he's saying is, I said earlier that he died. Our father can't even accept that he died. That's what he's saying over here. Our brother died a long time ago. But he's so heartbroken about this that he, defying all logic, presumes maybe someday he'll come back, even though he hasn't seen him till this day. Of course, the person he's talking to is this person. So it's remarkable. But here the point is he's trying to emphasize the degree of love that our father had for these two children of his wife. And now he continues speaking in Jacob's voice. If you take this one for me, and then an accident will take place, you will bring my old head down to Sheol in sorrow. Here it's interesting that, again, Jacob did say the karo ason, bad things might happen to him. It's not, I think, a coincidence that once again another link to Joseph from Jacob's perspective, because what's the name of Joseph's wife? Joseph's wife is named Osnat. Osnat is playing on Oson. Joseph, in a sense, karo Oson. Misfortune has overtaken him, because he's married into the priesthood of Egypt. He's married the daughter of Potiphera Kohenom, the priestly family of Egypt. And Jacob is afraid that this one will be lost as well. Or rather, Temetz, if you go down, remember the brothers, and the text talks all the time about going down to Egypt. Vayerdu achayosei, vayerdu, redu shama, shivru lanu ochel. And Judah says to Joseph, our father was concerned that in going down for food, loredet, to get the food, we will do something else instead. Instead of going down to get food, we will bring his head down. We'll bring him down, his white head down. So this is now we get to Judah's final argument. So what is Judah saying? So now let's just finish up the speech, and then we'll discuss it and questions and comments. If I go back to my father, your servant, and once again the word einenu, and the nar is einenu, is not with us. Since his own life is bound up with the others. It's not even clear. Nafsho was clear. His soul is bound up with the soul, but it's not clear which soul comes first. Is it Jacob's soul bound up with Benjamin, or Benjamin's soul bound up with Jacob? It's both, actually, but it's interesting. Once again, you can't know about whom he's talking, because the father and the child are basically one. That's his point. So if that happens, and Nafsho, Kshurab, and Nafsho, and the next verse, another ambiguity. Vayakiroto, when he sees Kien Hanar Vamate, when he sees that the boy Ein, once again Einenu, the third time, when the child is Einenu Vamate, how do you read Vamate? The two ways to read it. You can read it two different ways. One way is if upon return he sees that the boy is not with us, then he will die, then Vamate. That's one way to read it. He will die. There's another way to read it. And if we come back and he sees that the boy is not with us, comma, Vamate, and presumed dead, that the Vamate can be read as referring to Benjamin. He's not with us and therefore he's died. Just like the other child, just like the Einenu of Joseph. He's missing, but Judah said earlier, but he died. He probably died. He's not alive. He's Einenu, but he died. So this is the same thing over here. If we come back without the child, Einenu, he's not there, then he's presumed dead. So either you could once again read it both ways. Is the Vamate going on Benjamin, presumed dead? Or is the Vamate what will happen to Jacob if we come back without Benjamin? Then your servants, in fact, will have brought down Sevat Abdecha Avinu Biyogon Sha'ola. We will bring our father's head down in grief to the grave, to Sha'ol. That's the situation, he says. That's the situation. Now, what's interesting is, before we get to the bottom line of this, I want to make the point that what Judah probably picks up in the Joseph narrative is this. He doesn't know why. He knows he's concerned about the old father, because he asked more than once about the old father. That's for sure. For some reason, he wants to see this child, this young child. Very important to see him. Who knows why? He has an interest in the young child, and he gave him extra gifts. He cares about him. But there's something else over here as well, which is that for some reason, he doesn't know why, but for some reason, this viceroy of Egypt wants nobody to die. Because remember, when the brothers are accused of stealing the goblet, the brothers said, whoever took it should die, and we will be slaves. And the fellow said to them, no. Whoever took it will be a slave, and the rest of you can go free. So no one's going to die. And Joseph said the same thing. He'll be a slave. For whatever reason, he understands that Joseph, the viceroy, doesn't want anybody to die. And Judah's whole speech is, well, you know something? If you do what you want to do, somebody will die. Somebody will die. Our father will die, and maybe even this child will die being separated from his father. So it's counter to what you yourself have expressed as one of your concerns, that nobody will die. One or both will die. Nafsho kishura b'nafsho. One soul is bound up with the other. If they're separated, one or both will die. So that's what Judah's picking up over here. It's a very good antenna. He's picking up on this. And that's the whole argument. It's not about innocence, guilt, or anything like that. That's not the point. He's picking up on what he believes the viceroy is concerned about. He doesn't know why the viceroy is concerned about it, but it certainly is true that the viceroy is concerned about it. Okay, now let's finish up here. Then I will take comments. How much more time do we have?
We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay, so let's finish this up. And now, fine. Now let's just finish this up. Now he's explaining something. Why is Judah speaking? Judah's not the oldest son. Joseph knows the ages. He sat them down at the table in size order. Why is Judah speaking? Why is he the one? So Judah says, your servant has Tanar, has guaranteed, has pledged himself. I'm the Orev, he says. I'm the Orev. If I don't bring it back, and therefore I will be counted a sinner all of my days. And therefore, so now, so take me instead of the boy. I'm the pledge. Take your servant myself as a slave instead of this young boy. Let the boy go back with his brothers. Talks about Benjamin and the others as brothers. Yes, he's the son of the beloved wife. The others are not, but they're all brothers. Let him go back with his brothers. Take me instead, because I pledge myself. How can I go back? Lest I see the evil that will befall my father. It's interesting, in other words. So here we have, of course, the lesson was taught to him by Tamar, his Rabbi, about the Eravon. The story of Yehuda and Tamar taught two things. If you want to build a family, you need two things. You need confession, Sodka Mimeni, and the taking of responsibility, the Eravon. We had the confession of Judah back earlier, Man Daber Man Tzadok, Sodka Mimeni, and now we have the Orev, now Anochi Erevenu. So since I place myself in his stead, I'm in his place, he says. I've already defined myself as being in his place. So if you want to take him, you can take me, because I stand in for my brother. And the reason is because I made this commitment. And furthermore, it's got to be this way. Because if I go back without him, I will see the evil that will befall my father. And the evil that will befall my father is what he said earlier. So this is Judah's speech. And if you're Yosef listening to the speech, it's a remarkable speech. It means that one of the children of Leah is willing to forfeit his life for the sake of the child of Rachel, the favored, pampered child of Rachel, who was favored not just by his father, but also by very viceroy himself. And of course, the message would be that since Benjamin's role is to replace Joseph, so this is how they would act towards Joseph today, not the way they acted 20 years ago. This is how they would act today. So now we're going to have Joseph's response to this amazing speech. This is Judah's speech. Judah's speech is about self-sacrifice, basically. And more than self-sacrifice, it's about willingness to become the slave. And here we have a very deep point about Judah. And this is the last thing I'll say about Judah. I'll take some comments and questions if there are. And that is, Judah is going to become, Judah's the leading brother. We already saw back in chapter 38 in Judah and Tamar intimations of kingship. I'm not going over all the intimations. The intimation is not just leadership, but kingship. At the end of the day, the staff and the seal, staff and the rod shall not depart from Judah. He's going to become the king. And the king is a position of great authority. But what's interesting is how does one become the king? What certifies Judah as the potential melech? What certifies Judah as the potential melech is his willingness to become the Eved. Slave becomes the king. It's a very powerful idea. The slave becomes the king. And what they're really interesting is what they're really fighting over, something that later on plays out in the Tanakh in terms of Benjamin. In other words, who was going to actually who laid claims on Benjamin? Is it Joseph, who wants to keep Benjamin in Egypt with him, maybe to protect him? Or is it Judah, who's willing to sacrifice himself and therefore to free Benjamin from slavery? At the end of the day, it's Judah that will overcome Joseph, which is how it works later on in the Bible. First king of Israel is from Benjamin, and the second king of Israel is David, the ultimate kingship, and he's from Judah. Now, let me stop at this point over here. Are there any comments or questions?
Rabbi Silber?
Yes.
The pasuk where he says that Yaakov thinks that Yosef was torn apart by a wild animal, would that maybe give Yosef a clue that maybe all these years Yosef was wondering, did my father, was he have anything to do with what was done to me? He sent me there, and this maybe appeases him and gets him to reveal himself because now he understands that Yaakov had nothing to do with it and thinks he's been dead all these years.
Right, so that's the argument of Bin Nun. Yoel bin Nun makes the argument that Yosef was suspected. He thinks that Yosef suspects that his father maybe was part of it. I don't actually believe that to be the case. I don't see any evidence. But yes, he's certainly hearing in a very graphic way that his father has been mourning him all of these years. That probably he doesn't know that much. So that's something which is very powerful. Again, Yosef Yehud is not wrong about this. Yosef is asking about his father several times because he cares about him, So I think that certainly when he hears this, I don't agree with the idea that he suspects his father. I would say the following. I don't think he suspects him of consciously setting him up. But what I will say, which is certainly true, is that Yaakov, not consciously, and that he didn't want it to happen. But at the end of the day, Yaakov does send Joseph to his brothers, and he knows it's dangerous. And we know that because Joseph says, Hineni.
Yeah.
Go and find your brothers, and Joseph says, Hineni. So Hineni means it's dangerous. It's clearly, I'm willing to do it.
I'll get it for you.
There's a price that may have to be paid. Yeah, so I would say that much, certainly.
So you have the question of why Yosef never sent all these years, why Yosef never sent a message to his father. And that's
right, I spoke about that. I don't believe it's because he suspects his father. I think the answer is actually simple. He says why. Because he says, I'm starting a new life. And when you start a new life, I grew up with people like this after the Holocaust, after the Shoah. They're in America, they're starting a new life. It doesn't mean everything was bad in Europe, that they have some good memories. But the fact is, I'm starting over. And that's what Yosef actually says. I'm going to forget the past. I'm starting over. I'm in a different country. I have a clean slate. I'll see how far it's going to take me. takes him pretty far. But I don't believe, and nothing that's in the story that suggests that he has any negative feelings towards his father. On the contrary, he's concerned about his father. And certainly he doesn't think his father purposely send him away to be killed. I think I don't see the psukim supporting that theory. It's been known suggested. I don't think it's correct. But I think he wants to forget the whole picture. But he loves his father, but you can't just take part of it. You got to forget the whole thing. Ashana, forget kol beit Davi, he says it. I forget my past and kol beit Davi, my suffering and all of my father's house, even the good parts of it. That's my take on it. So others have other views, but that's my take.
Okay.
In other words, the text doesn't invite this question.
That's right. I don't think that's.
Do you think that the Karahu Hasson happened in Yaakov Avinu's opinion? He married Asenat, so Joseph's children aren't his grandchildren, and that's why he has to adopt them.
Yes, I think certainly later on, I think that what Yaakov goes down to Egypt to do, in the deeper sense, is not just to meet Joseph. He has to find a way to include Joseph within the family. That's the missing piece over here. Because at the end of the day, Joseph is, he's on a certain level, he's always a Jew in terms of his values to some extent. But on the other hand, he dresses like an Egyptian, he works for the Egyptians, and we've been through this, and there's more to be said about that. We'll get there. And Yaakov's mission, which he has chosen to undertake, is to bring Joseph back into the family. Now, how he does it is very interesting. And Menashe and Ephraim are two Egyptian boys, and he's going to adopt them as his own, as he says, like Reuven and Shimon, etc. We'll get there. That's a whole central part of the story. Yaakov is one might say, the hero, the last part of Sefer Bereshit. He finds a way to include Joseph, not just as a part of the family, but as a prominent part of the family, Bechor, as it were. But that's
so
a long story.
He's reversing an Asson. He is reversing the
Yes,
Asson.
for sure. I mean, and the point of fact, by the way, I mean, this is a whole other point, but that if you think about the story of Joseph, I mean, this is a separate point, but I think the story of Joseph actually is that Joseph is separated from the family at age 17. And the point of fact, you have to wonder about this Joseph. I mean, I'm not sure that the Chumash is saying this explicitly, but if Joseph had not been sold into slavery, given his enormous talents, he might be the fourth of the Avot, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. I mean, but he spends his entire life basically in this culture of Mitzrayim, which is problematic. One might say he spends a good part of his life fighting off Mrs. Potiphar as symbolic of Mitzrayim, and just surviving the culture of Egypt as a stranger, etc., as a Jew, and those are Joseph's struggles. But the Asson, one could say, is that being sold to Egypt, of all places, sold into slavery is what he's sold into. You spend your life fighting that, and that precludes you having other battles, other struggles, which is, becoming another Abraham or something. He's not an Abraham. He's not a Jacob either. He's Joseph with his own skills, but he's in a different arena. That's the point I would make. But for sure, Jacob's role will be to bring Joseph back, the Egyptian Joseph back. We'll get there later on. Okay, so anybody else? Yes.
I have one comment, the regular comment. You're a genius, Rabbi Silber.
Well, whatever. Thanks for the compliment. I wouldn't put it that way, but okay. All right. So we'll continue next week with this great story, and we have Joseph's response. This is very striking.
Purim Sameach. Thank you so much.
Purim Sameach. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's marvelous.
Okay.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Silber, and thank you to everyone who has participated and asked questions. As always, I'm so impressed with the questions in this class. Before you go, I want to extend an invitation to you all, because later today, if you've not had your fill of learning, we have at 1 p.m. Eastern time another shiur with Rabbi Silber along with Rabbi Dr. Samuel Liebens, a pre-Purim program, Living in a World with a Hidden God. You can register for this excellent event today with the link that I just put in the chat, purim.drisha.org. It's a perfect way to prepare for Purim. And we also have the Rappaport Family Memorial Lecture coming up on the theme of Passover, the Seder within the Passover Seder, with Rabbi Nathan Laufer, and you can register for that at rappaport.drisha.org. Thank you all.
That's on the 19th, right?
That's, yes.
12
Yes,
o'clock.
sorry,
That's my
that's
class.
Sunday the 19th of March at 12 p.m. Eastern. Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everyone. See you next week or later.
תודה רבה, חג שמח.
חג שמח. Bye-bye.